The flickering gas lamp in my antique map shop cast long, dancing shadows across the room. I'd come back for a forgotten ledger, but the soft murmur of voices from my husband's back office stopped me cold. I pushed the door open to find him, my husband of 30 years, with my son's fiancée, Ava. Her dress was pooled around her ankles. His hands were tangled in her hair. The gasp that escaped my lips was a raw, wounded sound. But as they scrambled apart, my best friend Maria, who'd been waiting for me in the car, grabbed my arm and pulled me back. Her eyes were wide with something more than shock. "Evie, wait," she whispered urgently. "I saw them earlier at the docks. It's worse than you think. This isn't just an affair, it's something else entirely." Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. My name is Evelyn, and I'm about to tell you how a sordid betrayal unraveled a secret that had been buried for 20 years. Drop your city in the comments. Where are you tuning in from? My life, up until that moment, had been carefully curated, much like the rare 17th century maps that lined the walls of my shop, the cartographer's nook, here in scenic Mystic, Connecticut. For 3 decades, Richard and I had been a pillar of the community. He was a respected wealth manager, the kind of man who sponsored little league teams and knew every local business owner by name. I was the quiet historian, the woman who could tell you the story behind every cobblestone in our charming seaport town. Our son, Leo, was our masterpiece. At 26, he was a thoughtful, talented architect with a heart as open as the sea. He was the center of my universe. When Leo introduced us to Ava, I was enchanted. She was a curator at a local art gallery, with eyes that sparkled with intelligence and a smile that could disarm anyone. She seemed perfect. She listened intently when I spoke about my maps, and she praised Richard's business acumen with a reverence that, in hindsight, was far too practiced. They were getting married in 6 months, and I was overjoyed, already picturing grandchildren toddling through the aisles of my shop. But there were subtle dissonances, tiny smudges on an otherwise perfect map. Richard, who was usually so careful with money, became almost reckless in his generosity toward Ava. He co-signed on a luxury apartment for her downtown. To give them a good start, he'd said. Then there was the prenup. Richard was adamant about it, which I found odd. But the terms were even stranger. He had his lawyers draft a document that seemed designed to protect Ava's assets from Leo in a divorce, not the other way around. "She's a rising star, Evie," he'd explained, waving off my concerns. "Her art collection is already worth a fortune. We have to protect her future." It felt wrong, but Leo was so in love, and I didn't want to be the meddling mother-in-law. The other red flag was Ava's intense curiosity about Richard's business history. At family dinners, she'd ask pointed questions about old partnerships and deals from the early 90s, framing it as admiration for his career. "I just find your origin story so inspiring," she'd say, her gaze unwavering. Richard, basking in the attention, would recount his triumphs, conveniently omitting the messier details. I brushed it off as the flattery of a future daughter-in-law. I didn't see the glint of calculation in her eyes. I didn't see that she wasn't admiring a map. She was plotting a course. The night I found them, the betrayal felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs. But Maria's words, "It's something else," echoed in my head, a chilling premonition. The next morning, Richard's apologies were slick and rehearsed. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness, fueled by too much wine at a business dinner. Ava sent a tearful, rambling text, begging for a chance to explain. I ignored them both. My shock had crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just a scorned wife. I was a historian, and I was going to uncover the truth. I started with Ava. Her life story was polished, an orphan raised by a distant aunt in Vermont, a scholarship to Yale, a promising career. It was a sad but inspiring tale. Too inspiring. I hired a private investigator, a discreet ex-cop from New London named Sal. Find everything, I told him, my voice shaking but firm. I want to know who she really is. While Sal dug into her past, I did my own digging into our present. Maria, who works as a paralegal, helped me get access to financial records I had long ignored. I spent sleepless nights hunched over my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating a terrifying picture. Richard had been liquidating some of our long-term shared assets, stocks, bonds, even a property we owned on Block Island. He'd moved nearly $1 million into a high-risk private equity fund. The fund was managed by a shell corporation, and the primary beneficiary listed on the account was Ava. My blood ran cold. This was more than an affair. This was a heist. The prenup suddenly made perfect, sickening sense. It was designed to ensure that when she eventually divorced Leo, she could walk away with the money she and Richard were siphoning from our family, and Leo couldn't touch it. Richard wasn't just cheating on me. He was cheating our son out of his inheritance, his future. And he was doing it with the woman Leo loved. The call from Sal came a week later. He sounded grim. "Evelyn, you need to sit down," he said. "Ava isn't her real name. She was born Amelia Miller." The name hit me like a rogue wave. Frank Miller. He had been Richard's first business partner, a brilliant but trusting man. 20 years ago, they'd had a catastrophic falling out. Richard had leveraged a hostile takeover, pushing Frank out of the company they built together. Frank lost everything. He was publicly disgraced, financially ruined. 6 months later, he died of a massive heart attack. The papers called it a tragedy. I now knew it was a casualty. Frank had a wife and a little girl, Amelia. They disappeared after he died, supposedly moving back to the Midwest. Sal sent me a file. It contained a grainy photo of a 5-year-old Amelia, a small, dark-haired girl with fiercely intelligent eyes, standing beside her father. They were the same eyes that now looked at my son with feigned love. It all clicked into place. This was a revenge plot 2 decades in the making. The affair wasn't the motive. It was a weapon. She had seduced my son to get into our family and seduced my husband to get into our finances. She was going to destroy Richard the same way he had destroyed her father, and she was using our family's love and trust as her tools of demolition. My heart ached for Leo, a pawn in a brutal game he didn't even know he was playing. The anger that rose in me was primal. They had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The engagement party was set to be the social event of the season in Mystic, held in the grand ballroom of the Seaport Museum, surrounded by historic ships and the ghosts of the past. It was the perfect stage. For 2 weeks, I played the part of the heartbroken but forgiving wife. I told Richard I was willing to go to counseling, that I wouldn't tell Leo about the mistake for the sake of his happiness. The relief on his face was nauseating. He and Ava thought they had won. They thought I was beaten. The night of the party, the room was filled with over 200 guests. Our friends, our family, our entire community. Richard stood by the podium, beaming, ready to give a toast to the happy couple. Leo looked so handsome in his suit, his eyes full of love for the viper standing beside him. As Richard raised his glass, I stepped forward. "Before we toast," I said, my voice ringing clear and steady through the microphone I had arranged with the event planner, "I have a little presentation.